Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's special council meeting on April 3rd, 2023. As we begin this afternoon's meeting, I'd like to acknowledge that this afternoon we're gathering on the traditional territory of the Neutral, Anishinaabe, and Haudenosaunee peoples. We recognize our responsibility to serve as stewards for the land and honor the original caretakers who came before us. Our community is enriched by the enduring knowledge and deep-rooted traditions of the diverse First Nations, Métis, and Inuit in Kitchener today. Are there any disclosures of pecuniary interest? There being none, we'll move on to presentations. And we have Mr. Steve Vandekeer here, Director of Transportation at the Region of Waterloo, with a presentation on the Lancaster ramps to and from Highway 86. I will note that we do have one delegation following the presentation, Ms. Hannah Domagala. So with that, we will turn the floor over to you, Mr. Vandekeer. Welcome, Steve.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mayor and Council, and thank you for allowing me to present to you this afternoon. Can everybody hear me all right? Excellent, excellent. The Lancaster ramp closure project is being led by a project team consisting of staff from both the region and the City of Kitchener, as well as the Ministry of Transportation. I've pressed the, there we go. It's working, thank you. Just want to show you a map showing the project limits. The Lancaster Street interchange is in the middle of the slide, and the ramps in question are indicated in red. But also want to bring your attention to the Bridgeport Street interchange in the upper left of the slide and the Wellington Street interchange to the lower right. Just want to note how close the Lancaster Street interchange is to the Bridgeport Road interchange. It's 800 meters or so, which is normally, if the ministry was designing a new highway, they would never have two interchanges this close together. So what's driving this project? Well, one of the big drivers for this project is safety on Highway 85 southbound. In the last 10 years, there's been nearly 200 collisions southbound, and it's mostly due to the weaving section that occurs between the short section between the Bridgeport on-ramp and the Lancaster Street off-ramp. I'm sure many of you have driven southbound on Highway 85 and encountered some backups through there. And when there is a collision there, it generally backs up to beyond University Avenue, affecting hundreds of commuters. I think just a few weeks ago, there was a full closure southbound after a collision in that very area. So that's one of the key drivers. Another key driver is an exciting project that the region is working on with the City of Kitchener to reconstruct Lancaster Street, basically from Wellington Street to Bridgeport Road. And this project involves changing the cross-section. I hope you can see the diagram fair enough on the screen there, to include on Boulevard, high quality, all ages and abilities cycling facilities on Bridgeport Road, on Lancaster Street, sorry. And it's the intention to connect this project to a Bridgeport Road project that we're working on as well, that also includes a high-quality cycling facility. So to put a high-quality, all ages and abilities cycling facility on any road, you need to address all the barriers. And one of the biggest barrier to putting this type of a facility that would encourage all users is the Lancaster interchange. And so the direct tapers of ramps on and off Lancaster Street are huge barriers that are driving an uncomfortable situation for cyclists. So it's not possible to put in a AAA facility if you have to cross direct taper ramps like this. Something needs to be changed. So that's also a key driver for this project. So we went out to the public in December of last year and posted some project information on the Engage website. And I think we got a very good response. We had 3,000 or so visitors to the website. We had close to 700 responses. I'd say the majority of the responses were either positive or neutral with regards to the ramp closures. And some of the positive benefits that were cited by the comments included safety for users and improved highway operations. And potentially with the Lancaster off-ramp removed, there is the potential to improve the Bridgeport on-ramp. You probably can make the ramp a little longer, so merging onto Highway 85 southbound will be easier as well. And staff from the Ministry of Transportation and the City of Kitchener supported the ramp closure. We also heard some concerns about the ramp closures, a key one being concerns with increased travel time to use alternative interchanges, with some requests to consider improvements at other locations, Bridgeport ramps, as well as Wellington Street as well. So let's have a look at that concern in detail. So this slide shows two maps. I hope they're big enough that you can see them, but the existing ramp movements are shown with a dashed blue line, and should the ramps be closed, the alternative movements are shown in solid red. And staff assessed the increased travel time associated with the ramp closure and found that it was around 3 minutes or so. But there are some capacity constraints at some of the existing ramps, interchanges would have to be addressed. In particular, signalization of the ramps at the Wellington Street interchange, and as well signalization of the ramps at the Bridgeport Street interchange. And these two diagrams show some work that the region is undertaking along with the Ministry of Transportation to modify the Bridgeport interchange. In essence, to signalize both ramp terminals and to remove the direct tapers on and off Bridgeport to the highway ramps. This will allow the installation of another high-quality AAA cycling facility along the north side of Bridgeport, shown with a kind of a turquoise line on the plan. So we're in discussions with the ministry about this. They're supportive of it so far. They have not signed off on these changes, but we're hoping that this will move forward so that it can be built as soon as we can get it into our program. And this Bridgeport facility would link really well to the Lancaster Street facility, which would create an excellent link from Kitchener to Uptown Waterloo, in addition to the spur line connection. So another good link. It brings the whole Lancaster Street neighborhood into a cycling facility that they can use to get to Uptown Waterloo. The project team looked at a number of alternatives, including leaving the ramps open, making some modifications, and of course closing the ramps. And they used criteria such as safety, the ability to increase active transportation, future people moving capacity, and highway capacity as evaluation criteria. And based on this evaluation, the project team is recommending the permanent closure of the Lancaster Street ramps. This will complete a missing gap in the active transportation network. It will create actually more people moving capacity for future development, and it will definitely reduce collisions on Highway 85 southbound. This graph just shows you people's travel habits now and into the future based on what percentage of trips are by different modes. I draw your attention to the bar second from the right, which was based on a comprehensive study done in 2016 by the University of Toronto. It's labeled 2016, that bar. And you can see the trips, 82% of trips in this area were done by personal auto use. That's the red portion of the bar. And the very top portion in green, I think it's 9% I can read from here, is the walking and cycling portion. Now the bar to the far right is our target from the 2018 Transportation Master Plan, which was a target to reduce personal auto use down to 70% from 82%, and to increase walking and cycling to 12%. Now, given that all local councils have recently adopted and endorsed a strategy for greenhouse gas reductions, which is very aggressive, 80% by 2050, this is what the travel habits need to look like in order to achieve those targets. That's the new bar I just added to the right, which shows personal auto use going down to 27% and walking and cycling increasing to 50%. This is not an incremental change. This is a transformational change. Transformational change doesn't usually happen through one single decision or act. It's usually the accumulation of hundreds of everyday decisions by individuals and governments on actions and projects just like this one. In terms of next steps, I'm here to provide information to you and to hear your thoughts on this project. I'll bring them back to Regional Planning Works Committee tomorrow, and they will decide on moving forward. If approved, the project would go to council for approval on April the 12th, following which we would file the environmental assessment study. And if approved, we would work with the Ministry of Transportation to incorporate the ramp removals as part of an upcoming MTO project on Highway 85, which would be funded 100% by MTO. So thank you for your attention this afternoon, and I'm happy to answer questions.
Thank you very much. We do have some, and there may be more later. And I know I have some. Councillor Singh.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you for your presentation. Can we go back again where the traffic patterns, just the bar chart?
Did you want to see the slide with the red lines and the blue lines? Is that
The reduction in driving patterns, that has to be brought to 27%, I think, that one. Just, and as you do ask the question too, is that in consideration that by that later years,
Oh, I see.
in the decades to come, a lot of the vehicles are going to be
This one?
electric vehicles as opposed to gasoline vehicles. So is that taken into account as well, or?
It is. But considering the growth that's anticipated in this region for 2050, there's no amount of road widening that can be done to accommodate the number of trips that are anticipated if those mode shares don't drop drastically.
No, so this is not the chart. I'm talking about the chart where to meet the next one, I think. Is the next one? There you go.
I'm sorry, I forgot to click for the last bar.
No, that's okay. You imply that, there's going to be a reduction in use of vehicles to meet our targets for 2050, 80 by 2050. But if a lot of the vehicles, even if the patterns don't necessarily change, the argument I'm trying to get at is, the region's coming at an approach that we need to make it more pedestrian and cycling friendly, this node, as opposed to still being reliant on vehicular mode of transportation. That still continues to be the primary node for that type of access in that neighborhood. And what I'm saying is, you're making an argument, hey, this is one way for us to reduce the use of vehicles and rather, kind of pressure more towards different modes of transportation. But does this chart take into account in future years, in 2050, we're not going to have fossil fuel powered vehicles. We're going to have electric powered or other novel way of moving of vehicles. So does that take into that account as well?
I'm sure it does, but fossil fuels may still be required to produce the vehicles, the electric vehicles and other technologies. So it's the target that we're aiming for, and we have to be aggressive on this target. Foot has to be fully down on the pedal in order to get there.
No, I appreciate that. Just, I'm not convinced by the argument, but thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Singh. Councillor Clancy.
I have a few questions. What would happen if, what would the active transportation plan be if the ramp stayed?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Well, there would have to be basically a bottle. It'd be a crossing of the existing ramps, but there wouldn't be any traffic control in order to control vehicles. So it would not be a AAA facility. It would not be a facility that's considered to be usable by all ages and abilities, because you'd be crossing a free-flowing ramp. So there would be a walkway on the boulevard, but would have to turn and cross the ramp at 90 degrees. It's similar to what is at other interchanges right now in the region, and we're working with the ministry to change all of the urban interchanges in the region, because the highway is a great facility for moving vehicles, but it's also a barrier in the community, a barrier to active transportation.
And I just wondered, thank you, that's good. And maybe if you have examples, I'm visual, so if I know how to compare with, can you give an example of those 90-degree crossways?
One that was recently built, the Franklin Boulevard Bridge over the 401. There's a multi-use trail on Franklin Boulevard that crosses 401, and it has to cross the southbound ramp to go west on Highway 401.
Right.
So-
Highway 24.
So users on the trail do not have the right-of-way, they have to yield to vehicles, and when they're on a direct taper, the vehicles are moving fairly quickly, so it's not a comfortable situation for other than very experienced cyclists.
Okay, and that might add to the collisions that you're talking about, right? Like, and those can be more deadly? Like, I know vehicle, bike collisions are the worst, right? So,
Well, definitely, if users have to cross free-flowing ramps, there's extra risks to the users. There's no question about that. And if vehicles are traveling at 30, 40 kilometers, which would be the speed they would slow down to take the ramp, then those collisions could be severe with collisions or pedestrians.
okay. Yeah, I guess some feedback as the ward counselor for these ramps is, you know, I would have, maybe I should have sought it out, so rookie mistake. But, you know, it was good to see how many people you had attend the information session and that actually most of the residents were favorable to it. I think sometimes we only get a certain group of folks who aren't celebrating, you know? So, you know, maybe in future that would be helpful for me to have that kind of data ahead of time. Can you tell me how the collisions compare to other crossovers? You know, like you've given us some numbers, and any collision is a bad thing, correct? But I just wonder how it compares to other parts of that highway.
That location, the ministry has indicated that they're getting 3 to 4 times the expected amount of collisions for that type of an expressway. So that means it's flagged as a critical location for them. And you get 3 to 4 times more than, there's always collisions expected, especially with weaving sections of highway, but they're getting 3 to 4 times more than what is expected. So that's significant as far as the ministry and we are concerned.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Schneider.
Thank you, Mayor Brevanovic. What I haven't seen, and I feel is important, is what will the alternate truck traffic routes be? This is an area, we've got Waterloo Brewing there, we've got other industrial companies, we've got Amazon there. Where will they have to go to get onto the expressway?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, they would use the alternative interchanges as indicated on the slide, the red lines.
But sorry, alternative locations, but how do they get there? Will they have to go down Lancaster? Will that increase truck traffic on other streets? This is, to me, and we're not getting much time to give input here. It's not a very thorough report, in my opinion, because you're not showing us what's happening with the truck traffic, other than saying they'll go to the alternative routes. Like what, how, where, what streets will they travel to? What ramps will they use to access the expressway?
They can generally use the regional roads, like Lancaster Street, Bridgeport, and Wellington, to access the interchanges there, and the increased travel time is only a few minutes.
Okay, it's not very clear to me, and I'm very concerned about where the truck traffic is going to go, so thank you.
Councillor Chapman.
Yeah, thank you. I don't want to question what you're doing because I haven't been at any of these consultation events, but I had a couple questions. Have you considered closing just the northbound off-ramp where there seems to be less traffic, rather than closing both the on-ramp and the off-ramp?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, if we only close one of the ramps, then we won't be able to put the facility on each side. We would only be able to put a facility on one side of Lancaster Street. So those ramps are very lightly used. The northbound ramp, which is the one to head up towards Waterloo, only sees 1,700 vehicles in a whole day. That's very lightly used. There's city streets that have more traffic on it than that ramp. And the southbound exit ramp sees about 3,000 vehicles a day, which is, again, very, very light traffic. But we need to close both ramps. We also looked at whether we could come into ramp terminals and signalize, but there isn't enough storage on the southbound exit ramp. Traffic would back up onto the highway, which would be horrendous for operations. And on the north side of the bridge, if you if you brought that ramp to a terminal with signals, it'd be too close to the Bridgeport signals.
Right.
It wouldn't operationally be a real challenge to make that work. I don't think it would be possible, or the ministry wouldn't allow it.
And maybe I missed it in your presentation or in the report, but how do the number of accidents in this particular area compare to other off-on ramps along the expressway?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, like I said, the ministry is seeing, they've reported they're about 3 to 4 times higher than expected at this location. So I don't know the comparison to other areas, but they're telling us that it's a high number compared to other locations, 3 to 4 times more than what they would expect.
Okay. And in this chart that we're looking at here, I see an increase in transit only from 15 to 20% between now and 2051. I mean, if we're serious about active transportation, shouldn't that be like an increase to about 50%? Like,
Sure.
is the region looking at ways to increase the transit system and make sure that it's like working well?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, yes. And we're about to embark on a new integrated mobility plan that would be looking at all those things and what the practical mixture of walking, cycling, and transit would need to be to achieve those targets. So those numbers could change a bit, but the key message here is the personal auto use needs to come down significantly because there just isn't enough road capacity to manage all the personal trips if there were to stay 70% of them or 82% of them as personal auto use.
Right. My last question is kind of off topic, but so I've cycled down Wellington Street where there's an off-on ramp on either side of the street, and it's very dangerous as a cyclist to cross any off-ramp. So are all of the off-ramps going to be improved to make it safer for cyclists?
Well, if I had my druthers, I would. Wellington Street is a Kitchener street, but I'd certainly be willing to work with city staff on talking to the ministry about making some improvements there. But we are working with the ministry at all the other locations where there's regional road crossings like University, Bridgeport. We're also looking at Tressler Road. So we're working, and the ministry has been very cooperative in the last few years at looking at it, whereas 10 years ago, it probably would have been a more difficult conversation to have. So things are getting better.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Ioannidis.
Thank you, Mayor Urbanovic, and thanks, Steve, for coming in. It's good to have you here. The question I have is, I was always under the impression that these interchanges were under the provincial jurisdiction. Is this still true with this site? Because it sounds like it's not.
It's under the control of the ministry.
Okay. So what's happening right now is you're putting forth a change in the direction of this, and you're applying to the province to get these changes.
Through the mayor, yes. If regional council approves it, then we would take that endorsement and request that the ministry close the ramps. And staff are very supportive of it at this time at the ministry, and they're willing to incorporate it into an upcoming contract.
Okay. My other question is dealing with the one slide that you had, it had the traffic lights, and then it had whatever the off-ramps. I couldn't quite comprehend what I was looking at there. Is it going to be for vehicles still?
Would you like me to go back a few
Yes,
slides?
please.
My pleasure. Perhaps it was this one?
Yeah, it was these, yes.
That's at the Bridgeport interchange.
Oh, Bridgeport.
And it's hard to see, but ghosted in gray are the existing loop ramps. So when you get off at the Bridgeport interchange, there's direct ramps that go on to Bridgeport. Those would be closed, and all the movements coming off the highway would be brought to a ramp terminal, the black lines that you see on those diagrams, where there would be signals. Because then priority can be given through the phasing to allow cyclists to cross the ramp terminal. Now, if you cycle along Bridgeport, you have to cross high-speed ramps. And there's also a weave on Bridgeport where traffic is coming off Bridgeport to get to the ramp, and ramp traffic is coming off the ramp and coming onto Bridgeport.
Okay.
Again, not a comfortable situation for pedestrians or for cyclists, so this would change that configuration.
Okay. it clarifies now where it is, because I was thinking of Lancaster. I don't recognize, I didn't realize it was Bridgeport. Okay. And I guess my last question would be, with regards to the slide where we had the significant reduction in vehicle traffic reduction, when's the last TMP that the region's conducted?
Was the 2018 master plan.
And when's the new one being put forward?
We're working on it now. We're just starting it this year, and we hope to be complete by the end of '24.
Okay, because if I look at it that way, are we looking at drastically changing the way the roads in the region are going to be? Because this is a pretty drastic change. Are we looking at a drastic change in the future?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, that'll be up to regional council as to the direction they would like to take in regards to how regional roads will function in the future. But staff believe they've been given pretty clear direction to date based on Transform Waterloo Region. And so there needs to be some reductions in personal auto use. Because like I said, we can't widen our way out of congestion. There's just no possible way to do that. And the more we widen roads, the more we induce more personal auto traffic. So we have to change. We can't be business as usual. How severe it is will be subject to how regional council looks at the new mobility plan.
Okay. All right, I guess my last question would be with regards, you said Transform Waterloo Region. Is the region concerned about not reaching their targets in this way? Like, is that why we're doing this? Like,
Through you, Mr. Mayor, every decision adds up. It's the accumulation of everyday decisions on projects like this that add up to make us move forward towards those targets. If we don't make these incremental day-to-day decisions, we'll be moving backwards instead of forwards. So this project is important. There are many more coming up, also some tough decisions to make that we hope we can present to regional council in the future.
okay, thanks Steve for coming in.
Councillor Deneau.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a few questions. What would the impact on the businesses in around that area be? Like, do we have any data as to if they will increase business or decrease business, especially off the off-ramps?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, there was no detailed analysis of business impacts done. Most of the analysis centered around trip times, travel times, and how they would change. So the project team believes that with an extra 2 or 3 minutes of travel time, it wouldn't have a significant negative effect on the businesses. And to a point about increasing active transportation, if there was more active transportation along the road up to Bridgeport and across, it could actually drive some economic development as well in terms of active transportation also drives economic development as well.
Okay. And my last question is there anything the region can do to actually mitigate the amount of travel time that is put onto everybody's drive? You know, we talk about climate change and we talk about, well, we need to reduce our carbon emissions, but you're adding 2 to 3 minutes on people's drives. So that's kind of counterproductive about actually what we're trying to attain. So how can we have minimal impact, zero impact on people's drives as far as time-wise?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, as I said, we will be working, and we are working with the Ministry of Transportation to make some capacity improvements at the adjacent interchanges. So that will help to mitigate some of those delays in terms of getting on and off the ramps, which will help all the users, not just the ones trying to get back to that area. It'll help all the users. So that's one thing that we're working on.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Davey.
Yes, thank you. Just a couple of questions, if I could. Thank you for coming in for your presentation. If those ramps would be removed, do you know, like on a percentage basis or anything, how it would affect the traffic volumes at the intersection of Bridgeport and Lancaster?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I don't have that number off the top of my head. Perhaps if Paula Sawicki had been here with me today, she might have that number. I could certainly follow up with you on that. Paula had the flu, so she couldn't come today.
But it's safe to say it's expected to go up?
Yes, there will be some increases at that location.
Okay. Did planning staff look into the proposed intensification and development, housing development in that area?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor, we did look at that. I think there was a concern raised, I think it was by yourself, that we looked at in terms of how we could accommodate the development and future movements through that area.
Okay. Yeah, because there's, right in the corner there at Bridgeport, Lancaster, there are 1,200 proposed new homes that will be coming to our committee and council at some point, and that's giving me some pause. The last question I have is, in terms of the predictions, I appreciate the chart and the hopeful transfer over from automobiles to transit, but one of the ways that I see that happening, and I'm curious in how your team's looking at it, is this is a 100-year decision we're making here, the way I see it. And as we start to develop autonomous vehicles, I think that's really going to blur the line between what's considered transit and what's considered a personal vehicle, because I think we'll be renting our smaller vehicles more than actually physically owning them, which I would think would lend to the need for as many accesses as possible. Is that the prediction in terms of transit that you see, or is this based on people using buses in LRT in perpetuity?
Those are the things that we'll be looking at through the new mobility plan in terms of what the mode shares would look like in the future, and how could they change, and what would be the consequences of different alternative worlds, so to speak. It's hard to predict exactly how things will go, but we want to make sure that we've got a resilient infrastructure. And putting in an all ages and abilities cycling facility is going to really support that type of mode share through that area and the connection to Bridgeport. So that's why the project team felt strongly about this.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. Before I go to you, Councillor Clancy, for your second round, I have some questions that I'll ask. Thanks for coming in, Mr. Vanderkeer. You referenced the accident rate being 3 or 4 times. The report talks about roughly 170 accidents, but that's over a 10-year period. So if we average that out, that's 17 a year. So if we're talking 3 or 4 times, we're talking that for this type of exchange, the province would estimate, presumably, that there would be 4 to 5 a year, and in fact, there's 17 a year. Is that correct?
Roughly, yes.
Okay, so I'm just wondering, like, when staff look at this and make a recommendation as significant as closing a ramp like this, I look at some of the other stats for regional areas. Ottawa and Homer Watson roundabout, for example, which over the last 3 years has had 606 accidents, averaging 202 a year. If I go actually and look at a ramp, the Ottawa and Alpine Highway 7 and 8 eastbound on and off ramp is averaging 30 a year, just in that one location. And then, of course, there's other major intersections across the region, including Fairway Wilson, Ottawa Strasbourg, Victoria Fisher Hallman, that are all significant accident areas. So I'm just trying to understand how do we balance that out? Because I mean, we're not making recommendations to close off any of those intersections.
That location is not serving a lot of traffic. As I said, 3,000 exiting vehicles is extremely low for a ramp. So it's not serving a major transportation function compared to other interchanges. The Wellington Street interchange and the Bridgeport interchanges are moving, I think, 4 to 5 times at least more traffic. So they're very critical interchanges. So you have to balance that against safety improvements and as well the ability to provide what we need as active transportation facilities along Lancaster Street. If we can't close the ramps, then we're not going to have a high-quality facility on Lancaster Street.
So I guess just to go along with that, I guess I would have liked to have understood that in the context of some of those other intersections that I talked about, and including that Ottawa Alpine Highway 7-8 eastbound on-off ramp. But if we if we're considering this, how are we weighing in the impacts on the neighborhood, the businesses, the trucking? Like, we have an industrial area, as you know, in that area that's still quite active, and I think, in light of the demand for industrial land, will continue to be active. I've heard from some of those people who have concerns. And, on the opposite end, I look at, for example, Ottawa Street, that the region just finished in the last year or so. But those ramps continue to be in place, and bike lanes have been added, and pedestrian sidewalks are in place. So I'm just really struggling to understand why we're targeting this one after decades of it being in place and serving this community.
We're taking advantage of an opportunity through the Lancaster project because it is coming up for reconstruction. The project team has met, and they've gone through public consultation, and the preferred cross-section on Lancaster Street is to provide an in-boulevard cycle path or cycle track, which is to be used by all ages and abilities. So a key barrier to that being continuous. If you think about your trip, if you're going to take a bike trip from your home to work one day, all it takes is one barrier along that route that'll make you change your mind and decide to drive. So we need to knock down all the barriers on routes. And because we're also planning a high-quality facility along Bridgeport, these two facilities would connect together and make a key link that'll take people from Victoria and south of Victoria, I should say east in this context, all the way up to Uptown Waterloo. It's a wonderful connection if we can make it. So we have problems at other locations. I'm not here to solve them all with you today. We've got lots of other priorities I'd love to fix too. And where we have other problems with ramps at interchanges, we will address them with MTO. Like I said, we've got a major project right now along Trustler Road. There's a lot of safety concerns there with the need for signalizing those ramp terminals. And we are looking at trying to work with MTO to rebuild that interchange to provide capacity for the future, but also to get in active transportation facilities under the highway so that we can connect the neighborhood, the Forest Heights neighborhood, down to Ottawa Street, where we already have a really nice multi-use trail. We have to have connectivity within the network, otherwise people won't make those decisions that they need to about whether they're going to bike to work or bike to the store or they're going to drive.
So the last question, because nobody else is in the queue that I'll ask now, is when you consider this and consider closing this particular one, do you have a sense, I know you've been a professional in this field for many years, how many other instances, like I've really struggled to think about in our region or across southern Ontario, have we seen where the province has been requested to close ramps as opposed to municipalities, including our own, for many, many years requesting, begging the province to open ramps and to actually put additional ones in. And so it seems a little counterintuitive when we know that those requests continue to be there, when we continue for things like Highway 8 having a westbound ramp going onto the 401, which has been talked about for many, many years, and so on. It just seems counterintuitive to be taking something like this away that's served this community since the early 1970s.
I think your question was, what's my experience in dealing with other ramp closures on ministry projects?
Well, are you aware how
Not that many.
Yeah.
Not that many. But I think the Ministry of Transportation is changing the way they think about transportation. It was all about the car not that long ago, but they're starting to think differently as well, and that's why they've been very cooperative on this project and other projects that we have along 85 to look at every single one of the interchanges to make them much more easier to use and less of a barrier to those on foot and on bicycle. So I think times are changing. It's not about just catering to the car. It's about catering to all the users. And crossing a highway is a significant barrier on a bicycle.
Thank you. I'll have some comments to that later. Okay, we'll move on to delegations. Thank you, Mr. Vanderkeer. There don't appear to be any more questions. And we have Ms. Hannah Domagala here, and I'll remind her that delegations, well, she heard this already. Earlier, you have 5 minutes to make your presentation. Welcome, Ms. Domagala. There you go.
Well, can you hear me?
We can, thank you.
Okay, it takes a while for the computer to add me as panelist. Thank you very much. I'm glad I'm going at the end, so I don't have to actually say the obvious. I will just add some of to the comments that have already been made. This is an interesting discussion because I myself, as a urbanist and somebody who has been advocating for reurbanization at the regional level and the city level for many, many years, and moving away into a different world. I find myself here on behalf of a company that owns a building on Riverbend Drive in the employment area. I would like to actually mention and talk about finding a balance. This is a ramp closure, an undertaking that we think is maybe not necessary, for the reasons that have been noted, but also for some of the impacts that it seems the region has not analyzed, which is the economic impact to those businesses directly on Lancaster Street, but also those around, like the mayor said, the industrial area or us on Riverbend Drive, who use the Bridgeport-Lancaster intersection very often, if not daily, which will be directly impacted by the closures of the ramps, because people will have to get to Bridgeport or Wellington via that intersection. And it has been noted that there is future development already proposed, but there will be even more development coming because that area is noted in the city's official plan as a corridor for redevelopment. So there will be other properties that will be probably bought up and more units will be proposed in the future, certainly by 2050. The other thing that has not been discussed or raised by anyone is the financial analysis. As I said at the regional council a couple of months ago when this was up, this is about money in a time where we are raising budgets by 8%. We are going to be spending money on something that already exists, that is serving people well, and we're going to be spending thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars to close the ramp, remediate it, make it work differently. And even if it is MTO's money and not the regional money or the city's money, it is our money. In the end, we all pay taxes. The other thing that is also that has to be considered, and I know in transportation master plans it talks about it, but how is it actually considered, is the weather. We can make all the analysis and forecasts we want of how we want the world to look like, but we are not going to change the weather here. We are going to still have a good 7 months of winter-like weather that we're cycling, especially with kids and people with other vulnerabilities will find challenging. This is also a location that is not right downtown or somewhere where there's a big trail network, so people will not commute as likely as in other spots. And as Mr. Vanderkeer said, the Bridgeport Road will have also a facility that will be in very high quality, so the question again begs, does it need two in such proximity? My point in the end, after hearing this whole discussion, is that right now, let's start with where we are at right now. There is no cycling facility. So by putting any cycling facilities, this road will be so much better in any way. There is, even if we leave it at the 90-degree intersection where people have to cross that ramp off, it is a good solution for now. Let's build a cycling facility on Lancaster Road, give the people the opportunity to use that mode of transportation, and yes, make an honest decision to keep it at 90 degrees. Maybe it's not a AAA facility, but it's still much better what we have right now. And then make a decision over time of, do we need to close it? Do we need to make any chances? And then all the technology conversations will also evolve and show us where the world is heading. maybe in even 5 years or 10 years, we will be not even talking about what we're talking about today, but a totally even different thinking. So I think the best solution right now is to leave it as is, to have recycling facilities, to work on the Bridgeport ramps, which are really, really awful, because there's crisscrossing traffic with no control whatsoever, and make sure that the Bridgeport and Lancaster intersections function, especially when all these added units come, and then leave ourselves that room while saving thousands and thousands of dollars by not closing the ramps. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Damagala. Any questions for the delegation? There don't appear to be any. I just have one for you. You're obviously here speaking on behalf of one of the businesses on Riverbend Drive, but from your sort of, whether it's through dialogue that you've had with others or your own experiences, would you see the closure of these being an overall positive or a negative for not just yourselves, but the other businesses both along Riverbend as well as the ones in the industrial part off of Lancaster, Union, that whole area?
I mean, I've seen a couple of articles written in the paper about these impacts, and of course, all the buildings along Riverbend Drive and the other ones that are going to be rerouted and impacted will have the same consequences. I mean, the Bridgeport and Lancaster Street intersection is a challenging intersection already, and it will be even more in the future with all the added units around it and the rerouted traffic. It's definitely not the worst intersection in town, but as you may yourself know that even the collisions here are by far not the worst number of collisions. And even Mr. Vandekir said that it's a lightly used ramp. So the opportunity for collisions with the cyclists is also not a tragic opportunity like it is on Ottawa Street that is much more used. So again, statistics can be presented however you want and talked about it however you want, but the fact is that we have a used and a lightly, but not a heavily used ramp that where we can actually live with certain decisions to leave the ramp open and to build the cycling facilities. And just to go back to your question, economic impact, it will have economic impact on obviously Riverbend employment area and most of all on the businesses Lancaster Street, which feed off directly from that traffic that we all know that drive-by traffic is a very big driver to business, and taking that away will impact them directly.
Okay, thank you. Okay, there don't appear to be any other questions, so we'll move on to, I think there's, Councillor Davey, I think you're bringing forward a motion.
Yes, I believe staff should have it come up on the screen there. Would you prefer I read it?
Sure. I think it might be good.
Sure. Whereas the province of Ontario built Highway 85, also known as Conestoga, or the KW Expressway, in the late 1960s and early 1970s, and today sees average daily traffic volumes of 85,000. And whereas Highway 85 ramps at Lancaster Street see average daily traffic volumes of 3,000 vehicles exiting at the southbound ramp and 1,700 vehicles entering the highway at the northbound ramp. And whereas the region of Waterloo is proposing to request the province of Ontario to close and remove these ramps from our growing community, despite the planned growth in this area and overall planned population growth for our communities of approximately 50% between now and 2051. And whereas municipalities often spend years, if not decades, trying to get new access points built to from the provincial highway system, and rarely do you see any closures of access points, be it resolved that the City of Kitchener indicate to the region of Waterloo our opposition to the proposed closure of the Lancaster Street ramps and request the region of Waterloo Council to not support the EA, and further be it resolved that in response to some of the identified issues in the area during the EA, the City requests the province of Ontario and the region consider the signalization of a northbound off-ramp at Bridgeport Road, and finally be it resolved that this motion be shared with the region of Waterloo, the City of Waterloo, the province of Ontario Ministry of Transportation, and the Ontario Minister of Transportation, Carolyn Mulroney, and area MPPs.
Okay, that's been moved. Is there a seconder for the motion? Councillor Michaud, thank you. Discussion. Councillor Davey.
Yeah, no discussion, just wanted to reiterate the comment that the ward I represent has Lancaster and Bridgeport just north of this proposed closure, and it is easily one of the busiest intersections, I would think, in the city. It's actually one that routinely, when I've run in elections, I've stood on and waved because there are so many cars slowing down. I feel like I could have a conversation with a lot of them. And as busy as it is, there are significant development proposals going on in that area, which will only add to this. And finally, I believe that while this might be something that can be looked at if traffic patterns change in the future, because I think we all agree that we can't widen our way out of the transportation problem in our city as it grows, I also think there's a bit of a difference. There's a bit of a difference here, but this is an effective narrowing or removal of this infrastructure. And I do personally believe, while no one can predict what transit looks like, 30, 40, 50 years from now, I do personally believe convenience weighs out in the end. And convenience, as I see it, once there are autonomous vehicles, people are going to they're not going to be going to bus stops to go to where they want to go to. They're going to have a vehicle, probably a smaller vehicle, coming right to their home that is going to need, I think, infrastructure exactly like this going forward.
Thank you. Councillor Singh.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I realize that Councillor Davey has moved this, and thank you for doing so, but also you have, for an extensive time, continually tried to advocate with the region regarding I think a full comprehensive look at this, and weighing in all the consideration, and the motion as stated really identifies a major point, which is that this area has access to a major transit node, and something that costs a considerable amount of money to do, replicate, and again, a considerable advocacy approach with the Ministry of Transportation to even make it happen. And we have it here already, and we are looking at getting rid of it, perhaps just essentially, primary reason for, additional access for other modes of transportation, for pedestrian and cycling. Not to say that's not important, but again, we have to look at where the traffic patterns are of now, how this area requires that connection way to a higher transit node, the expressway, how Lancaster as an economic node has had kind of a depressed aspect for decades, and we continue to invest through economic development, incentivization, and working with the development community to see a transition in this community. And finally, where it's taking hold and it's happening, again, our partners with the region are considering a different approach, which would have a negative effect overall to our desired intent for this neighborhood. I think that slow, positive approach is necessary, and that what's being recommended through this motion of looking different approaches in different ways rather than eliminating an asset to this community is the right course of action. With that, I'm happy to support it.
Thank you. Councillor Clancy.
Yeah, I'm hoping this is more for feedback, and I think as a community, we're in a big transition phase and change is hard, and I think it's important that I hope in the future we could find ways to really further explain the benefits of biking. I think sometimes we have a thing where we pit car drivers and bikers, it becomes this sort of resistance between the two. I know that I often hear that at the door, like people are very enthusiastically bikers, people are very enthusiastically drivers, and sometimes, I hope we can find more harmony. I think the benefits of biking aren't fully realized in our community, and hopefully we can use our tools as a city and as a region to communicate those benefits greater, because I think there is a lot of benefits to biking that aren't fully appreciated in our community, and maybe that's on us to kind of educate and kind of promote those good news stories more widely, so that we can see a better vision for active transportation. That's just my hope, is that we can kind of find more harmony between drivers and cyclists, so that projects that involve both can move forward with less tension.
Thanks, Councillor Clancy. I don't see anyone else in the queue, so I'll just make a few comments. I want to thank regional staff for coming in and making a presentation here. I was surprised when this issue was before regional council without our council having had an opportunity to provide input into the process. This is, while I recognize that, our staff often comment through various regional projects at the region, this is one where, a change this significant, in my mind, should have had the region come to council looking for some direction on it. I understand the desire to change, the commitments that we've made with respect to climate change, the desire for a modal shift, and the need for a modal shift, and quite frankly have been extremely supportive of that around this horseshoe. But it needs to be done in a way that the balances change and moves it forward in a way that the community can accept and adopt. And quite frankly, I think the proposal to shut it down will actually harm the efforts towards complete transportation networks rather than help them. I can tell you that, certainly I've heard some frustration both from the business and the residential community around both not being aware of this and the timing of, when we went out for this at the region wasn't ideal. And really concerned with the direction. And I'll just, share a couple of the comments that I received from folks without naming any names so I don't upset our clerk. As a resident of the North Ward, I'm incredibly dismayed by the proposed closure of the Lancaster Street ramps to Highway 85. I've lived in this neighborhood my entire 52 years, and this exchange is essential to this neighborhood. This proposal is very short-sighted and incredibly disappointing. I take these ramps multiple times almost every day and have never seen an accident. These give easy access to a central part of our neighborhood for businesses, churches, homes, and communities. Heard from another resident who says, I believe if they're closed, it'll create larger traffic concerns overall. I can appreciate that bike lanes may need to be installed and should be, as long as it's not going to cause bigger issues for all current and future users of the roadways. And that, for me, is really the concern of what's being proposed here. When we recognize that our population is slated to go up by 50%, closing this interchange just doesn't make any sense to me. And when I compare the accident numbers, and while, yes, 3 to 4 times sounds bigger, or it sounds like a big number, on its own, when I start comparing those numbers to other major intersections around the region, it just doesn't make sense to me. I can tell you, as someone who has had to drive past these ramps every day I want to be accurate in my reflection. Some weeks every day, some weeks, 4, 5, 6 days, depending on other council commitments. I can tell you that I have never passed the ramp where people are getting off to come into Kitchener that there hasn't been 1, 2, or 3 cars coming off. Like literally not once have I passed it, particularly in the time that, since this has been on the radar, where I've been paying even extra careful attention to it, that I've seen it. On the northbound exit, certainly I can say that one is used less, and I don't see as many people using it. I also don't see, quite frankly, in my time, and again, it's one moment in a day, or 2 moments in a day when you're going in each direction, I have not encountered an accident in that space. That's not to say that obviously they don't happen, but I've seen them in other areas of the highway more so than here. So with all those things factored in, I certainly am supporting of this motion, and certainly, depending on what the outcome of this motion is here, we'll be speaking to it at Regional Council, and certainly at Regional Council I expressed my concerns as well as a member of that council separately. So, The motion has been moved and seconded. All those in favor? Those opposed? The motion is carried. Okay, thank you. Thanks. Motion to go in camera for the items listed. Moved by Councillor Deneau, seconded by Councillor Schneider. All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. So we'll wait for the bylaws until later, so we need to recess into caucus. Motion to recess. Councillor Davey, Councillor Clancy, all those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Thank you.